From Chicago's Can TV, a look at the week's events is reported in the newspapers, in the blogs and online, and on radio and TV. This is Chicago Newsroom.
Hello again. Welcome to another edition of Chicago Newsroom. I'm Ken Davis. We're going to talk about a lot of things today, but before we do, just a sort of a mention of regret. One of our guests, Cliff Kelly, was going to be here today, and I want to mention the fact that he really was seriously going to be here, but some things came up because the last couple of days he's been very busy broadcasting his program from Springfield, and because of logistics, he wasn't able to join us here today. We were going to be talking a lot about what's going on with the tax hike and will the governor sign the death penalty and so forth. But not to worry, because we have yet another great Chicago historian, expert, raconteur, man about town, and just sort of general purpose know-it-all. Andrew Patner is joining us on the show today.
I think I'll put that on a card, general purpose know-it-all.
Andrew Patner is joining us today. Andrew and I have known each other for a very long time. We used to work together briefly in public, well, not even briefly, for several years in public radio together. And I'm a great admirer, I must say, of all the things that you've accomplished as a critic at large in the vaunted Chicago Sun-Times. And of course, also working at WFMT. You have a program every Sunday night, Monday night. What it is, Sunday night, every Monday night at 10 o'clock, Critical Thinking with Andrew Patner. And I'm just really glad you're joining us today. So we're going to do a one-on-one. We can attempt to the extent that you and I are capable of doing it to take a look at what happened in Springfield in the last 48 hours. It's been pretty dramatic. I'm more intrigued by the death penalty, whatever you want to call it, the making the death penalty illegal in Illinois than even by the tax increases.
Well, they're related in that we're in a time in Chicago, in Illinois, and in the country where the way our legislative politics works is upside down. So here's our tax situation, which we've known about, our budget situation, our pension situation, for a decade or more. And the idea is 4 people will sit in a room on the very last day of a session that's also that afternoon, the first day of a new session.
Right.
And we're going to resolve all of this, and then the governor will sign it.
Taking lame duckery to a new height.
To a new height.
Yeah.
The death penalty, which is something that has been a non-issue in many ways in Illinois, because for 11 years we've had the moratorium, and therefore, neither Ryan, Blagojevich, or Quinn, whatever else they do or don't have in common, no one's wanted to lift that moratorium. Then sort of out of the blue, we abolished the death penalty, and Quinn, who's just won his first election as governor, so doesn't have to worry about anything for 4 years, says, oh, I have to look at the political ramifications of this before I sign it. But I don't need to look at the political or economic or fiscal ramifications of this giant piece of taxes, pension reallocation, et cetera. So my guess is, I'm not keen on journalists making predictions, but my guess is that he is going to sign this bill. The fact that an abolition of the death penalty, that civil union laws could have gone through a relatively moderate to conservative legislature is something that I don't see Quinn turning his back on. I don't see what he would have to gain by being the proponent of executions.
Of course, a lot of Illinois journalists have been pulling out a lot of their hair trying to figure out what Pat Quinn will do. You can't predict what Pat Quinn will do. So
he's a man with no constituency.
Yeah.
He's a man who won by a very narrow margin, and he's a man with no allies. So we don't know what he's going to do, period.
Right. And the death penalty thing, as you say, is an opportunity for him to build a legacy right from the very first day of his administration.
Take claim for it, even though he didn't have anything to do with its introduction or passage.
Right. But it's also interesting, apart from the raw politics, the gubernatorial politics, it's also interesting to me to see that that here in Illinois, a couple of very important groundswells have happened, in almost kind of under the radar. You already mentioned the civil union legislation, and now this death penalty abolition, coming from a legislature that if it's marked for anything, it's for its inaction, for pretty much doing as little as it possibly
Well,
can.
it's a lot easier to do big symbolic things than it is to actually fund education, balance the budget,
There is that.
do the work. So,
Yeah.
and Illinois has almost always, throughout its nearly 200-year history now, Illinois has always been a moderate to liberal state, and we do sort of have the right. If now Senator Kirk reverts to the early years of Congressman Kirk, as he seems already to have done somewhat and abandoned some of this right-wing rhetoric, we will have in a very liberal Durbin, a moderate liberal Republican, a whatever independent governor, we'll have that balance that pretty much represents the range of the state. It's a state that has never gotten involved in much hateful stuff. It's a state that's always been very open about women, about racial equality, about gender, about sexual orientation, going back to having the first, accidentally, because of the legislature, having the first laws that didn't discriminate, didn't make criminal homosexual activity. So these are things we're good at. What we have not been good at for decades now is running the state.
Managing the place.
Managing the place, and planning for the future.
Yeah. Interesting, though, that Mayor Daley has never had any luck with any of his gun legislation in the Illinois legislature. It's just never worked.
Part of that, I think, is also that there's no way of knowing that any of these laws, particularly in the current U.S. Supreme Court environment, could stand. And I think that that's also an area when you have a state that is as divided between urban and rural, the concerns that people in downstate areas have about hunting and the symbolic aspect of guns. We've always had downstate and in the west end of the state, historically we had Democratic congressmen who were also not anti-gun. Remember that Paul Simon was NRA, Paul Simon was anti-abortion rights, and only later did he shift on those once he was established as a U.S. senator. So
do you think, and it's ridiculous speculation, but that's what we engage in here on Chicago Newsroom. Do you think there is a possibility that some new gun control legislation will begin to emerge in this country, federally or at any of the state levels, after what happened in Arizona?
I wouldn't be surprised at all if there's a shift in attempts on how to regulate guns outside of the federal government. The attempts by cities, chiefly District of Columbia, Washington, and Chicago, have failed in the Supreme Court. So, on the other hand, when you lose in the Supreme Court, what you also get are a set of guidelines, basically, of what the court might accept.
What might be accepted.
And I think that you will find, on the good side of federalism, which is the states as laboratories for trying different things, that you will find one or two states are going to throw something forward, and then some other states might copy it.
It's interesting that there seems to be at least a little buzz that maybe it's time to start regulating high-volume magazine clips, and just starting to nibble at the edges.
I mean, whatever one has to say about the founders, the Second Amendment, etc., how an originalist like Justice Scalia can say that the founders intended for rapid repeat fire automatic weapons to be used in the home or the supermarket, that's a pretty hard stretch to make. And even Justice Roberts seems to have said some things, written some things that indicate that maybe that's where the window might be. But the symbol, there seems to be in the country right now, through the House of Representatives and through the Supreme Court, the idea that we can't touch the symbol of a right to a gun.
Right. Did Tucson have an impact that's larger than the incident itself? I'm beginning to wonder if maybe that's true. We've had mass killings. They seem to happen every few weeks. Something different happened here. I don't know if it was because it was a congressperson, or maybe because of just the incredible story of Gabby Giffords, and she has opened her eyes and that kind of thing, that maybe there's a humanization of this slaughter, that's something unusual, and that it might have some impact?
Again, I don't know useful it is to speculate about the future, I was certainly intrigued that even the editorial page of the Wall Street Journal the day after the president's speech in Tucson praised his speech. Now that's a healing process right there if you want to see one. I think the fact that a congressperson who was doing her job, she wasn't at a imagine if something had happened to somebody who was at a fundraiser or a union event or something. It might have been very different. But here she was in the in the shopping center talking to people, and a range of people, including, you couldn't have, a child who was born on September 11th.
Yeah,
I mean, this awful
It almost seems like some
tragedy.
kind of almost divine intervention.
Yeah, and that there was a federal judge who was a Republican appointee, a large number of very, very religiously identified Catholics, and a Jew in the case of the Congresswoman, and the fact that she has survived. But what does anything have legs? Does anything continue? It's very hard to say. Certainly when you have John McCain's gift to the United States, Sarah Palin, every day opening her mouth and saying something insane. And I mean, she's even outdone herself now with this thing. Either she does not know or did not know what a blood libel was, or she and the people around her are even more cynical than people expected, and sort of knew that this would send the word out to people who have copies of the Protocols of the Elders of Zion or something.
I agree with that you almost have to go to one extreme or the other. Either she just really is profoundly unschooled in history, or she has people who are using her
or both,
or whatever it is. But we have only 29 minutes and 40 seconds, and I don't want to waste any more of it
On
talking
Sarah
about,
Palin.
if you don't mind.
I don't mind at all.
Because I think we got a lot of things we want to talk about. I want to bring it back locally. We spent a lot of time on this program talking about the mayor's race and about the aldermanic race. Last week we got into a geek fest like you wouldn't believe, just talking for 29 minutes about all the different races in the different wards, and it's all very interesting. But I'm kind of fascinated by what's going on with Mayor Daley in his sort of last couple of months in office, and that he seems to be settling some scores and taking care of some internal business. One of them that I thought might be of interest to talk to you about is something that has been going on with this, whatever you want to call it, consolidation of the Department of Cultural Affairs and the Department of Special Events. Two organizations that, while on paper appear to have something of the same mission, they present events for the city of Chicago, they almost couldn't be more diametrically opposed. I mean, one is Taste of Chicago and the other is music festivals in Millennium Park. It's never been a good fit to me. It's never seemed to me to be a good idea to try to jam these two things, put these two insects into the same bottle.
Exactly. There are so many interesting things here. One is the perennial attempt to see inside the mind of Richard M. Daley, which no one to date has succeeded in doing.
It has never happened.
It has never. I don't think it ever will.
It never will.
The understanding that the mayor has of the mixed legacy that he carries from not just his father, but from his parents. Remember that on the one hand, his mother, Sis Daley, was the person who, when she saw a copy of Mike Ryko's Boss in her neighborhood grocery store, used her connections to have the book removed from the city, from the entire chain.
Yeah,
right.
Yeah.
On the other hand, she's the one who said, "You can't tear down the library.
You can't tear that building down, right?
That should be kept for culture.
That should be our cultural center." And her
and
husband complied.
And her husband complied.
Right.
And we've seen too, Maggie Daley, the wife of the present Mayor Daley, has been basically the eminence grise of or whatever the feminine eminence grise is, I guess, just of the cultural center. She's been the head of the foundation that supports it. She's had her friends working there. She's had this understanding that we need something that does not say City of Chicago, Richard M. Daley, Mayor. We need something that could be Armenian folk dance. It could be Shakespeare. It could be Shaw. Could be black poetry. Could be seniors. Could be little kids. And we need that in the cultural center, in the neighborhoods, and now in Millennium Park. The other side are those days of Colonel Jack Riley and the original special events, which were political events, the St. Patrick's Day Parade, the dying of the River Green, and all of this, and that's continued. Taste of Chicago, Richard M. Daley, Mayor, you know. And so, yes, these things have had attention, and the mayor has, as you know, people have to remember that aside from all the graft, aside from all the patronage, we do have, you know this from your years working in city government, we also have extremely effective, technical, neutral people who make departments run, make the city work, allow us to have an airport that functions. And so there's always been decided the Department of Cultural Affairs is out of all of that. And we put that stuff in the special events. Now, why at the end of his 38-year term does the mayor feel he must push these together?
Well, Andrew, that's why we have you here today, is to answer that question. Lois Weisberg. I mean, let's talk about Lois Weisberg. Lois Weisberg, I believe she's she's a senior lady. She's in her 80s, 85 years old. She has been the mayor's most staunch ally from the beginning. She goes back to Harold Washington days. I don't think there's anyone who has anything critical to say about the job that Lois Weisberg has done all these years. To suddenly, what appears to me to be, shove the knife in her back as everybody's walking out the door is something that I just don't understand it.
One thing that, well, again, we don't necessarily know about the mind of the mayor, but we know his history. If you don't live in Bridgeport, or you weren't from that original group of friends, you are not necessarily safe from the knife. That knife could come at any time and for any reason. When you see a major...
But I'm sorry to keep interrupting. But I think there are many of us who have always kind of said all of the things that you've said, and then in parentheses, except Lois Weisberg, of course, who is the exception to all the rules, because Lois Weisberg delivers.
Look, I mean, I have to be very honest here. I have known Lois literally my entire life. She goes back even before Harold Washington. I have great affection and admiration for her, but I'm sure some people are saying that when she endorsed Richie Daley after the death of Mayor Washington, said, "You are the heir to Harold Washington," that there was some karma that was going to come back around for such an absurd statement. So is it that? But no, what I think the general rule in Chicago is when there is a structural change, it is not for the good. There's a reason behind it, and the Office of Special Events brings money in. The Department of Cultural Affairs doesn't put huge amounts of money, but regularly puts money out. And so all I can think is that there are hopes and plans for some major contracts to be let. There was a request for proposals. There was only one bid entered, and the mayor doesn't seem very interested in it for whatever reason. He's always had this thing about Jam Productions, which is a local company. But at the same time, there has to be some idea that we need to do more with that spigot that brings money in. And maybe he just thought, you know, Lois, why don't you take your retirement? She didn't want to because she feels strongly about this. And a few months ago, she even made public statements.
I was going to bring that up. I mean, her Sun Times, that interview in the Sun Times was one of the most remarkable, for those of us who are Kremlinologists, who sort of
never
watch
seen
the
this
city.
In this Kremlin.
I was reading that article, and I think my eyes were like, I could not believe that she told Fran Spielman, and then even said, "I'll probably get in trouble."
It was so Lois. I'll probably get in trouble for saying this.
Because for those who didn't see the article, what she said essentially was this idea of trying to privatize the Taste of Chicago and the things that special events do is crazy.
Right. She was critical not only of dismantling or restructuring her department, but of saying how the other department should go. Now, you know, I guess you do have a certain protection when you're of that age and that amount of loyalty and experience and closeness to Maggie in Lois's case. But I can't see good things coming from this. I do think it's also a reflection, sadly, on where we're at with journalism right now, because neither newspaper has a correspondent who is tasked to looking at culture, looking at these sides of things, including the money side. And we've had two people doing different and good coverage, each of them radio people, really, and music people. Jim DeRogatis on the website of WBEZ, and our former colleague Neil Tesser on theexaminer.com. Neil has been doing much more context and analysis. Jim has been doing raw reporting, throwing a lot of stuff out, not always pulling it all together. It turns out, it appears, that the 20 people let go from the Department of Cultural Affairs were actually transferred to a not-for-profit, the Chicago Tourism Fund, which is fully funded. Okay, but that doesn't solve the why hasn't there been one statement, one press conference, one booklet put out explaining what's going on?
I mean, we can get off of this, but I have been really looking forward to talking to you just because of this. It's been my experience over the years that cultural affairs has largely been the department in the city of Chicago that has pretty much worked from beginning to end. Now, they've had their share of criticism too, because it's a political city.
But I mean,
But it's not the same thing. It's not like the water department or something.
And it's not only worked well compared to other departments in the city, it really is the finest department in the country of this kind. That is a city department. And you look at the four people who have run it, they were all major respect: Madeline Rabb, Joan Harris, Fred Fine, and then forever, twice, Lois Weisberg. I mean, these are people highly, highly regarded in the world of arts and culture.
Which begs the question, why wouldn't you, since you have voluntarily made yourself a lame duck mayor, why wouldn't you just leave this alone and let the next guy come in or the next woman come in and decide whether they want to keep it or whether they want to make those
Very
changes?
unclear. And
weird.
Also, if it is a graft question, and I don't mean graft, the mayor follows his father's rule, which is give graft to your friends and relatives, don't take it for yourself. But if it is a graft question, maybe it's related to the incoming administration. We certainly have not heard any objections from his protege, Mr. Emanuel. So, I mean, or from anyone else of our not very impressive array of candidates. So now Time Out Chicago, another newer publication, a newer source of news and analysis in the city, a couple of months ago did do a culture survey of what was then a field of, I think, 26 candidates for mayor. The most interesting respondent to that was someone who I guess never filed, but the right-wing magazine publisher from Indiana, R. Emmett Tyrell Jr., the American Spectator, who remembered he had been born in Chicago or something. But he had a very interesting set of responses. But, so it's good that somebody's trying to put some of these issues out. And I don't say that so that you appeal to the eggheads, as they used to be called, or that, you get a few of the donors to orchestras or opera companies supporting you. But one of the things that Mayor Washington and Mayor Daley both understood is that this is a city where culture, indigenous culture and imported European culture, are both hugely important to the daily lives of people. People love the panoply of free events that covers the city and the panoply of ethnic museums and so on. And they also love the fact that we are known internationally for classical music, theater, now dance, with Joffrey and Hubbard Street being here. And whether it's a cab driver or a waitress, a steelworker, people love that, and they love that both are done and not done in an elitist way. Look at the mayor's crowning achievement, Millennium Park. Free concerts for all up until now. And like you said, why wouldn't you want that to be your legacy?
Right.
And this is another scary
anybody
thing.
who's ever just spent an evening at Summer Dance, just seeing the energy, the just the wonderful vibe of that.
I took some friends who are refugees from former Yugoslavia to Summer Dance a summer or so ago because there was going to be some Bulgarian dance. Well, we're not Bulgarians, but it's next door, blah, 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 and they won't know how to do it. I get up and I say, this is amazing. This is better than at home. Who is the instructor? And I pointed out the Chinese gentleman who is the Chicago expert on Balkan dance. And it's that kind of a thing. Another thing that's been underreported, the Grant Park Music Festival, the jewel in the crown of Millennium Park.
Really important.
Elizabeth Hurley came in to succeed Jim Palermo after many years. Very capable person. A job opened up at the Art Institute, and she's gone. So the Park District has been pulling out of this program, which it launched 70-some years ago. Department of Cultural Affairs, we don't know its future. We don't know who will be the head of it. It's not a particularly heavyweight board on the Orchestral Association for Grant Park. what's going to happen there. It's a union orchestra. There's a lot of money that has to be raised, and
they give free concerts.
Free concerts.
As free as can be.
10,000 people and up was.
And again, another
summer.
one of those things that if you haven't spent an evening in this town in the summer, hitting Millennium Park, seeing this well, anyway,
No,
you get the idea.
It's classical. This is not pops.
Right.
They are popular, but these are not dumbing down, nor are they pops concerts. And people come and they're quiet.
Yeah,
They listen.
It's a remarkable thing. We're down to our last couple of minutes. I
We
guess,
are?
Yeah, isn't that amazing?
Wow,
28
we
minutes
just started.
have just disappeared. Well, we'll just have to do this
Okay,
again.
part 2.
All right, so give me your quick rundown on we're down to, I think we could safely say, 4 mayor candidates at this point.
Again, we are
Andrew
in a
Patner.
time of tremendous shift.
As they
This
say,
is the first time ever in the modern and even not so modern history of Chicago where no one running for mayor comes out of a ward organization history, comes out of the Democratic Party history, the local, and by that I mean the party at the county of Cook.
Yeah,
you
right,
know.
right.
It's a wholly different.
Joe Barrios was busy.
Yeah, it's a wholly different setup. We have the possibility that we would have actually politically independent people in the city council once this election happens.
Possibly 20.
In a way, this is perhaps Mayor Daley's biggest laugh of departure because, frankly, none of these people are well qualified to be the mayor of Chicago. None of them have the background or the skills. None of them have a constituency. And we look right now as if we have a default successor in Rahm Emanuel, who's not even from, I mean, yes, he is a legal resident of Chicago. That was nonsense. It's still nonsense, but he's not from Chicago. He doesn't have it in
Wilmette.
Yeah, but it's not. Are you running for mayor of Wilmette? Do you even know where their city hall is or village hall? It's a strange thing. I still think we don't even know who the candidates are. But I think there's a real possibility that Del Valle and Chico could come together, just as. And then, what's going to happen with Carol Mosley Braun? Can she stay in the race? Will the Jacksons, in some way? And what this has a lot to do with, very quickly, the way that a one-party, one-man rule suffocated any development of any democracy in general in the city, and also how after the death of Harold Washington there has been no serious leadership of or coming out of the black community, and some of that has to do with the Jacksons, senior and junior, asserting for themselves certain rights and authorities. But we have not seen, we're really backward now overall.
Andrew, I'm really sorry to say that we're out of time.
Okay, thank you for having me.
There's so much more I want to talk to you about, and we will do this again if you'll have us.
It's been a pleasure and a privilege. Yeah.
Thanks very much. We'll be talking to you again real soon. And again, our regrets that Cliff Kelly couldn't join us, but he wouldn't have got to wear an edgewise.
Oh,
anyway,
no, come on. That would have been...
Could you imagine Cliff
It would have
Kelly?
been the battle of the big mouths.
You have been watching Chicago Newsroom. It's a community service of CAN TV, and of course you can find us right here at Blip TV and on cable, Channel 19 all the time. And don't forget to check out the mayoral forums. There are still a couple of them left around the city. You can watch these every Sunday at 5 o'clock right here on Channel 19 leading up to the election. I'm Ken Davis. Thanks so much. We'll see you again next time.